Charges of racism and sexism are a very serious matter, and one should be very cautious about throwing them around. It is completely unacceptable in today's society to be racist or sexist, and you don't come by sexism and racism very often. You'd certainly not expect to find them in a big YouTube channel that has millions of subscribers. And yet, there is one big channel on YouTube that has become notorious for what many perceive as promoting racist and sexist attitudes. I am referring of course to Buzzfeed, with its more than 10 million subscribers. In this video we will set out to check whether Buzzfeed is indeed as bigoted as its reputation suggests, and if so, what generates this bigotry? The main reason that prompted me to make this video is that recently we got a rare glimpse into the minds of the people behind the channel, as Kenny Moffat, one of its employees, decided to leave the company and become an independent YouTube creator. In a video he posted on his own channel, Kenny explained that he felt that Buzzfeed were slaves to quantity above quality, and are interested only in generating views. What he got in response was a slew of comments congratulating him for the move, but not so much for the reasons he gave. Rather, many have congratulated him for escaping that shithole of racism and sexism, a response that evidently surprised and baffled him quite a bit. Outside of the Buzzfeed bubble, Moffat suddenly encountered the real world and how a significant chunk of it perceives his former company, and that encounter was very upsetting. His reaction was to upload a video in which he defends Buzzfeed against its detractors, and in so doing, he gave us the opportunity to analyze the thought process of today's Western bigot.
I wasn't going to make this video, but the comment section for the Why I Left Buzzfeed video turned into a cesspool of some of the worst people spouting just hateful and ignorant things, so I'm going to fucking rant for a bit.
Moffat begins his defense by trying to counter the charges about sexism. I'm going to skip that part because his arguments are generic and thus not very revealing, and jump straight to the part where he defends against the accusations of racism.
The second argument against Buzzfeed is that they're racist against white people.
So, this is the charge. Buzzfeed is racist against white people. How does Moffat respond?
Y'all, Buzzfeed is white, first and foremost.
By that I guess he means that it is owned and run by mostly white people, and employs mainly white creators like himself, so it supposedly cannot be racist towards whites. But that is not a valid argument, Kenny. The charge is that Buzzfeed is promoting racist attitudes towards whites. You can participate in that foul practice even if you are yourself white, so your argument falls. You'll have to do better than that.
Secondly, you cannot be racist against white people!
Oh yeah? Why not?
Here's why. So the Oxford Dictionary defines racism as prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that one's own race is superior.
That is indeed the common definition, and it is quite clear. Or at least it is clear to people who have not been Buzzfed. As we shall promptly see, Kenny is going to completely twist it around, so I am compelled to preempt him by interpreting it myself. I apologize to all of you for making you sit through this explanation as if you can't understand the definition by yourselves. As we can see, racism is defined here as a certain form of prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism. Now, prejudice in itself is something that we are all guilty of. Since our knowledge is partial and based on where we come from, it is inevitably biased. We can rid our mind of a certain prejudice, but we can never hope to become completely free of prejudices. So prejudice alone is not enough to make you a racist. The question is how you treat your prejudices. As a decent person, you are expected to be aware of the fact that you are prejudiced, and when a certain prejudice that you have is pointed out to you, do your best to rid your mind of it. A racist, however, is someone who embraces his prejudice towards a certain race of people because he holds the belief that his race is superior to theirs. So a racist is someone who makes a conscious choice to be prejudiced. Similarly, discrimination is also something that we can never hope to completely eradicate. Every culture has certain biases that create discrimination against certain groups of people. As a decent person, you will try to abolish the discrimination when you encounter it. A racist, on the other hand, will want to preserve the discrimination, based on her belief in her superiority. And the racist will also maintain the antagonism towards the allegedly inferior race, instead of trying to overcome it. So racism is a conscious mental state. It is a belief in your own superiority above another race, a belief that you consciously choose to uphold and which determines your attitude towards that other race. That is what this definition says, and there's really no credible way to interpret it otherwise. that doesn't mean that Kenny isn't going to try to pull one over us.
So yes, prejudice and discrimination can be directed at all races, including white people, but racism is a different thing because of that last part about superior. Racism can be broadly defined to encompass individual and group prejudices and acts of discrimination that result in material and cultural advantages conferred on a majority or dominant social group.
So Kenny is basically taking the definition of racism that he just read and turns it on its head. According to him, racism is not prejudice and discrimination that are the result of the belief in one's racial superiority. It is racial social superiority that is the result of prejudice and discrimination. It has nothing to do with one's personal choice. For Kenny, if you belong to a race that is socially better off, your prejudices automatically become racist. And if you're not white...
So you cannot be racist against white people because white people have been at the top of the racial food chain since forever.
So if you belong to a group that is socially inferior to another group, your prejudice cannot be defined as racism, according to the logic Kenny is Buzzfeeding us. Of course, we know from history that marginalized groups often develop the most extreme forms of racism and bigotry, trying to compensate for the real-world predicament. We also know that this racism has often led individuals to perform violent acts against members of the hated dominant groups, or to mass murder if these marginalized racist groups eventually became the ones in power. But I guess knowledge of history is a bit too much to expect of BuzzFeed. Anyway, that logic leads Kenny directly to his other defense against the racism accusations.
White people are gonna come up a lot because white people have done a lot of shit. Slavery, Trail of Tears, Japanese internment camps. How about denying women's rights? Who's targeting Muslim Americans as terrorists?
The answer to some of these questions is the United States of America, and to the rest it is the entire human race. But we already know what Kenny's gonna say, don't we?
White people.
Really? Let's take the last question you've posed. Who's targeting Muslim Americans as terrorists? Here's a Pew poll from 2012, which examined the views of certain groups in America about other groups. We see that black Americans have a slightly more positive view about Muslims than white Americans, and on the other hand whites have a more positive view about Jews. So it appears that whites contribute more to bigotry against Muslims, whereas blacks contribute more to bigotry against Jews. But the differences aren't really that significant. Prejudices are something that pervades all of society, and everyone takes part in them, no matter what race you are. Kenny, however, seems to think that only white people are responsible for the prejudices and to the bad things that America has done because of these prejudices. Why does he believe that? Well, I think it is quite obvious. Since his view about racism is that only white people can be racist, that leads him to see everything as a fault of white people. In other words, Kenny has a prejudice against white people, and he consciously chooses to defend that prejudice. What do we call someone who is consciously choosing to be prejudiced against a certain race? That's right, a racist. And this is also the logic that we find in BuzzFeed's videos, which means that the accusations of racism leveled against them are 100% correct. These videos make it seem as though white people are the only ones responsible for prejudices that everyone else is guilty of as well. They usually feature members of a minority group questioning certain stereotypes and biases they encounter in society, and instead of addressing these questions to all of society, they are addressed specifically at white people. Here are some examples.
Why is a lion's life in Africa more important than the lives of black people here in America?
Why do you think I eat dogs? I have 2 dogs.
Why do you think all brown people are Indian?
Why would you ever say thug life? It's a bad life.
Why do you believe everything you see on TV when it comes to other races?
Why do we get upset when a TV show becomes diverse?
As we can see,
even though
BuzzFeed
diverse
is purposefully
usually just
pushing a
means
prejudice
2
against
people
white
of
people,
color?
and that makes it... Wait, what did you say?
Why do we get upset when a TV show becomes diverse, even though diverse usually just means 2 to 3 people of color?
Why do you assume
What
movies
was
with
that?
white stars are automatically more relatable than movies with people of color?
What?
People of color.
Come again?
People of color.
People of color.
People of color.
People of color.
Do I really need to explain how blatantly, thoroughly, and indefensibly racist that term is? Apparently I do, so here goes. When you refer to non-whites as people of color, you are suggesting that there is something different between whites and everyone else. In the past, it was a term that was associated with white racism, signifying that white people are the default of humanity. We've managed to clean our language from this prejudice term, but now it has been brought back as a term that signifies racism against whites, basically suggesting that white is not a color. But, of course, it is a total own goal, because it is even more racist towards non-whites, grouping them all in one bunch and erasing the differences between them. In the not-so-far future, channels like Buzzfeed will make videos about how racist that term is, and naturally blame its creation on white people.
Why does a person of color automatically mean black to you? I'm a person of color too.
See? It already started. And when you have such a racist mindset, it leads you to many idiotic and regressive positions. Here are just a couple of examples.
Why is your goal to be colorblind?
There's so many different types of people in the world, yet you can't see color?
Indeed, it is important to recognize the diversity in the world when we talk about things like culture. But that is not what we are talking about when we talk about being colorblind. What it means is that you should be colorblind when you are judging a person. A person should be judged by their character and their actions, not by the color of their skin. This is a basic principle of enlightened thought, and the fact that you at Buzzfeed don't understand this principle shows just how far down the rabbit hole of racism you are.
Why don't we know the difference between appropriation and appreciation?
We actually do, Kenny, but you evidently don't. Appropriation is the highest form of appreciation, and white people, just like any other race, do it all the time. I've already made a video about this, so I won't get into it, but the gist of it is this. Every act of human creation involves appropriating from other people, and if you are not appropriating from someone just because they are from a different race, then you are being racist. Your tone here suggests that you wouldn't appropriate from other races, so what does that make you? We haven't spoken about the sexism that is displayed in Buzzfeed's videos, and I don't think there's any need to. It's the same thing. Men are described as a superior class, so they are blamed for everything, and the videos promote bigotry against them. Here's just one example that I found particularly infuriating.
Why is it so bad to show your emotions?
It means you're human.
Can you tell by the tone of my voice how annoyed I am by this question? No? Well, that is because I am pretty good at controlling my emotions. It is a very important part of the masculine code to be able to control your emotions. Why? Because men who can't control their emotions are dangerous. As the weaker sex, women can afford to be more emotional, because the amount of damage they can do is tolerable. When men lose control, the ramifications are much more serious. This is, once again, a very basic piece of common sense, which you could have employed yourself before insulting our intelligence with this dumb question. But you are not interested in common sense, are you? What you really want is to color everything men do as bad. Buzzfeed's defense against these accusations might be that, hey, you say potato and we say potato. We simply have a different definition from yours to racism and sexism. While you define a racist and a sexist as someone who holds a prejudice based on a belief in superiority, we define it as someone who holds a prejudice while being a member of a socially dominant race or gender. But that line of defense is in itself immoral. The fact is that society at large still adheres to the traditional definition, and sees racists and sexists as people who consciously choose to uphold their prejudices. Because of that, we regard racists and sexists as bad people, and we exert all sorts of social penalties on them. According to your definition, every white person is racist and every male is sexist, and when you label people like that, society might then come to see them as bad people. You can destroy someone's life with this nonsense. As a principle, you should never label someone racist or sexist, unless they actually express belief in their race or gender superiority. We should call each other out on our prejudices, but do it in a way that shows that we believe that they are not conscious prejudices. What you can say to someone is that a certain view that they hold is bigoted, or that they are being bigoted in their attitude. When I'm telling you that you are being racist, that signifies that I actually believe that you are not racist, and therefore will be willing to change when I point out your prejudice. It is your response to my accusation that will determine whether you are a racist or not. So, Kenny, Moffat and Buzzfeed, this is me calling you out. You are displaying an attitude that shows a sexist prejudice against men and a racial prejudice against whites. Either change your attitude, or explain how it is not racist and sexist. The explanations we've heard from Kenny, as I've shown, are insufficient. If you can't defend your position, and yet you choose to keep holding to your prejudices, well, I hope you realize by now what that says about you.